Thank you for joining me kindly on the Sutherland Report. And I'm very excited to be here, very excited to be with a dear friend of mine as my guest. As you see in the intro, I have landed and my guest has landed. So we have unzipped ourselves from our parachutes and we are ready to go to discuss wherever God is going to take this discussion. So this is such a privilege. So I just want to welcome you, Celeste, to the Sutherland Report and for blessing me with your time. So thank you very much indeed.
Well, I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Not at all. So Celeste, first of all, let's from the top. Could you just say where can people reach you? Where are you accessible? I know you're very accessible in the digital media, but where can people actually reach you? Give yourself a shout out from the start.
Okay, so my videos and to become a subscriber is the celestialreport.com. And then my articles and my books are at shepherdsheart.life.
Brilliant, brilliant. Celeste, I want to take you back. I just want to take you back to 3 years ago. 3 years ago in March. I remember I think, a very seminal interview that you did, and I would like to start off our discussion with that. It was a seminal interview that you did with a mutual friend, which is on with L.A. Marzulli. Could you describe what that interview was about, what provoked that interview, and then what happened to you virally at that point?
So actually, we have to go back a little bit. It was the third week in January, and of course, I used to work for FEMA, the government, and so I was experienced with plans, and so I went to the World Economic Forum and saw all the plans that I had ever worked on that I knew about, both in books and on computers, and I was horrified because there was this famous infographic that had the spike protein with COVID and 200 different spikes, and that was the way they were going to change our whole world, everything that we know. Um, and they did it through COVID. And so then, a number of people, I went public with that information and also hydrogel. And so then, of course, I also did some interviewing with L.A. Marzulli. And so we decided to bring it to his audience. And so that's kind of how it happened. Um, I did it did go viral, both the World Economic Forum and hydrogel. It was back before YouTube was very aggressive with censorship, so at least it was up there for a time. Then, I had interviews from around the world. And then a man came to my home and said he was interested in learning how to organic farm. But when he showed up, he had like khaki slacks, a dress shirt, and leather shoes. And he took engineering type notes. And I thought, oh, this is kind of strange. Well, I started getting sick during my time. I only knew him a few weeks and we only got together a few times. And one day I ended up being so sick that I ended up in the emergency room. And when I got out, I was in the hospital for a little while. And what I learned when I got home was that this was a direct energy weapon. I was attacked and I was also poisoned. And the ABCs, let's just say the ABCs came in and they had confiscated all my computer equipment and even my personal handwritten address books and my calendar with the producers' backlines for all the interviews I had done. And then the hit pieces started shortly after that.
Could you, I mean, have you got that equipment back? Sorry if that's a very naive question.
So I was advised to get all new equipment because they can place a bug so small. I was dealing with super ABC agents that you would never know. And for privacy's sake, and for for the sake of myself and for the audience, I really needed to just get all new equipment, which is what I did.
Celeste, I remember that interview. I remember that interview very well. My own personal reaction to that is that I drew breath. I drew breath um, because on a personal level, I had just flown out to the US, come back. I came back in March 2020, and then within a very short period of time of being back, then President Donald Trump then shut the border, stopped flights coming in. The whole uh, story narrative have started about, of course, the wet market shutting down flights from China. Then there was this whole thing of, going for herd immunity, and then, that's another interesting story. But I had flown back, and then I saw your interview, and I drew breath, and I believe, honestly, that within our community, we all drew breath. None of us None of us saw this coming, if I'm very honest. I'm going to speak on behalf of everyone. If that's different, then they can tell us. Because it was so seminal what you then showed. After that, and you kindly talk about the experience that you've gone through in regard to an energy weapon, in regard to the poisoning. And I also remember, like others, we were praying for you. We were praying, prayers were going up in that situation. Suddenly everyone wanted to speak to you, didn't they, at
Yeah.
that time?
Mhm.
Without it sounding like a stupid question, why did they want to then suddenly talk to you at that particular moment?
Well, because they realized that was drawing on my experience, my government experience and military, and that I was basically a whistleblower that was relatively unknown. I have been a photojournalist since I was in junior high, and I did write articles that were picked up by the alt media, but I pretty much was relatively unknown until this big event in 2020.
What led you to that revelation? I think, you've hinted that early on in the interview, but what led you in the beginning of that year to then go and seek out that information?
Well, so I knew in December of 2019 that this was it. This was what they had been planning. They did a reclassification of life known as the philo code, and this pathogen weapon was the first release of something that had never been on the face of the earth, that mankind and animals and plants had never experienced before. And so I knew that. So beginning in December, maybe later fall, I was already seeing warning signs that something big was coming down, just because of my training.
Mm.
And so in December, I started to go to my sources, and I have very diverse sources. Some of them now are closed. You can't get into them anymore, but at the time I could. And I'm talking about unclassified material. I'm not talking, I've never covered anything that was classified. They may not want you to know it, but it's not classified in the traditional sense. So I just made my rounds of sources, and that's when I discovered the World Economic Spike protein. The World Economic Forum had just held their annual conference in January, the third week, and they released it, and I was right on top of it, and recognizing that it was all the plans that I had seen at work. So I recognized it for the true danger to the world that it was.
Why do you think that the truther community missed it? I mean, I'm saying that. I'm saying that on my behalf. I'm saying we actually missed it. Why do you think we did that? Why do you think others who would call themselves a prophetic voice then, and I'm not being nasty, why do you think they then missed it as well?
I think even so, there's two things that I think play a factor in that. One is that um, the truther movement is political. Um, this might come as a shock to you, but it is a very political animal, and and we've had an opportunity off camera to discuss that we are kind of stereotyped, like you cover this topic or you cover that topic or you cover another topic, and so there's not the fluidity between us. So you might be the super organic farmer prepper, but you're not following what's going on in the heavenlies. And so I think that that stereotype, and really we can't, there is so much happening right now, because personally I believe it is the end of days, that one person can't cover it all. But we have this, the third factor is our normalcy bias. We see the world in a certain way, and it's very hard for us to get out of that if the news coming in is a threat to that normalcy bias.
When you're using phrases like end of days, it is part of the discussion to help take us in a certain direction because we don't know who is listening. We to to for those people to give us the privilege of their time, and actually, I pray that non-Christians are gonna be listening to this, which is the priority. How do you define within your biblical lens, your biblical worldview? How do you define the end of days?
So that's a very interesting question. So really, this is universal. It You can be an indigenous Native American or um, person. Uh, you could be into many different religions, whether it's Judaism or Hinduism, Buddhism, um, many different, whatever religion you are. Maybe you are an atheist or an agnostic. Most people believe that these disasters are cyclical and that this is the last cycle. I think the exception to that would be a few new age people who believe that, mankind's going to survive this and go on to um, build a new breakaway civilization. I agree, except I believe that Jesus Christ is coming back and he will set his kingdom up. And so it will be under his reign and ruleship, which I'm looking forward to because there is no corruption. He is righteous and it will be a good place. And the world will be restored to the abundance that it was, maybe even as far back as the creation.
Wow. So why isn't it that you've said the whole thing of normalcy bias? Can we break that down? Because and I'm what has happened to the Waltons and what has happened to the Little House on the Prairie? In the fact that is that the viewpoint that people are looking their lives their lives through? I don't want to put words in your mouth. That like how are we defining the normalcy bias?
So, unfortunately, it is not you that is creating the normalcy bias. I mean, we all have it as humans. It once was, I would say, in the 50s. But as we approach the 60s, um, it we were the victims, quite frankly, of chemical warfare that was introduced into water systems, food warfare, and many, many layers of psychological and neurological warfare aimed at our brains and our thinking process. And this has actually become very advanced. And then what people will sound off. They'll say, okay, I heard this piece of information, and then they will bounce it off, and they will be looking for articles to either confirm or to disregard from the news media. And quite frankly, after 9/11, the news media was a messaging point for the one world government B system, whatever you want to think of, the powers that be. Um, they were forming and molding your normalcy bias, so that when you saw the news media, when you saw um, movies for entertainment, when you went to a baseball game or football game and there was the halftime show, it's all sending messages to your brain to get you to conform to the powers that be's agenda. And so that's where your normalcy bias now is not not yourself. It's a construct of the powers that be at this point.
Would it be fair to say that, say, within the press, it's this whole thing of you're not reporting on the facts, you are expressing an opinion deliberately to nudge people into certain directions that become op-eds, like frankly, I think we've never seen.
I think we're actually beyond the op-ed. I think at the beginning of 2020, you could have a free voice. At this point, due to the censorship, we're not even given a voice. The edict, the mandate has gone forth to silence anybody with truth, whistleblowers. Remember in the 90s, actually, going back that far, they were killing various groups of people, like alternative doctors, for instance, to silence them. Now we have a cyber silencing, which is really dismembering different people, truth people, from the equation. And then all the other people can, they think, oh, there's no other view. And that's not because there isn't another view or, news coverage on it. It's just, it's been silenced.
What happened to you? You came out, you did this seminal interview with LA, and you were censored. There were specific things that happened. Uh, Would you be free to talk about that?
So it started with hit pieces. Um, there was a woman, she was a doctor in theology, and she said, if you continue or persist to interview people that are not of faith and um, be interviewed and interview both. I was a guest and also I interviewed people not of faith, because I believe if you're born in this time, you have something to bring to the table. You are valuable and you are to be treasured. And so that it. And I got this threatening text message that said, if you do this, you will be, your reputation will be irreparably damaged. And that person didn't do it, but set out to get other people to do it. And they did. I call it the 10 sins of Celeste, that went forth. So not only was I getting, the ABCs were on me in censorship and discrediting, even people within my own faith, even people in the truth movement were doing hit pieces on me. She's not really who she says she is. She's this other person. It was the attacks have continued until I think it was last year. And last year they decided a new tactic, which is interesting. So pay attention, listen up, everyone. So they decided remembering you, silencing you, um, You may have seen some of it where you were forbidden, like I wouldn't wear a mask to a health food store I had patronized for 15 years. So they called the cops, put me in a troublemakers database, and it said I could not shop in Montana my life. Are you kidding me? The rest of my life? And it just so happened that I needed to tweak my will. And I called up a legal firm and they said, "Oh, give us 30 minutes." And they called back and they said, it was an attorney that was talking to me, and he said, "Unfortunately, our law firm cannot represent the likes of you." The likes of me, really? So this has really escalated last year. And this year, we're seeing an all out silencing, not only of truth people, but recently I have noticed. So, like I said, I go to my sources, and these are sources that I've used for decades and have used for decades, both at work and then in the government and then outside. And all of a sudden, they are going silent, especially there's a lot of information before something goes operational. But once it kicks off and it becomes operational, everything disappears. All the evidence disappears, much like the Georgia Guidestones were there for a purpose to inform us what was going to happen. And when it went operational, when depopulation was in fact operational in a big way, they got rid of the evidence. And how do I know this? Because it was the same model that they used with the Georgia Guidestones that they did with 9/11 with the Twin Towers. They got rid of all the evidence. They sent it to the four corners of the earth so that nobody could find the truth. They put they housed the truth in a committee that would tell us what they wanted us to believe the narrative to be. And we couldn't prove or disprove except for a few bold and courageous individuals that would go forward, like the engineers for 9/11 that
Mhm.
went forward, such people such as myself. So
9/11 is such an interesting case in point. Same with the Iraq War. Before that, and you and I will remember, of course, Colin Powell at the UN shaking a vial of anthrax, saying, this, and then Saddam Hussein has all this, and then over here, there was a sexed up dossier, and the inference was that Saddam Hussein could launch, various weapons of mass destruction in 45 minutes, and then we had this Chilcot inquiry that then said there was huge questionable elements of this. Then over here within the UK, there were a million people, I think, reported were on the streets of London to protest. And yes, I said that, but you wouldn't have seen them in camera wise. So then, of course, we go back even further. There is a point to what I'm saying. We go back to even further, and we've seen those pictures of supposedly CNN reporters on top of buildings pretending to be in Kuwait and doing this, that, and the other, and wind machines blowing and all this. And then, as you've alluded to earlier, with Hollywood, films like Wag the Dog and all the rest, we have realized it's taken a while all of this to be, we see this manipulation like some big sort of holograph. That is that's going back to the normalcy bias. So how do we, and we've talked about this, and we will get on to more in regard to the last 3 years. How do we deal, how do you deal with the fact that you came out and did that interview? The World Economic Forum, I believe, even said a statement about that. Even Reuters said a statement about you. Could you talk about that?
So basically, in that spring, it was first the World Economic Forum came out and said, no, this isn't. this isn't what she's saying. And they called me out by name. And that is very sobering. Here I am, a little old widow lady. That is causing the powers that be to quake in their boots, and they have to name me by name in hopes that I'll cower in fear and go away. And I just want that to put that as an encouragement that your voice is critical and important in this war of truth. And who are we going to believe? And then next in line, so a couple weeks later, um, Reuters came out and they contacted FEMA and they said there was no Celeste Solom that ever has worked for FEMA. And I had to laugh because, see, I had remarried. So they said my old name, and they didn't use my the name that I would have been at the time that I worked there. But they did it to their, for their advantage. So anyway, I find it interesting, and I found that very validating. That they say when you do news like this, when you're over the target is when you're going to get the hits, and it's persisted to this day. I mean, it's only intensified. So
That's interesting when you've said that's validation. Was there any did you feel fear at any point when the WEF say that, when Reuters say that?
no, I just I don't really have any fear. Actually, when I worked for the government, I was actually suing the government for some FOIA documents that would have given the world an insight of the technology that they're unleashing upon us right now. And unfortunately, I did win that suit, but the people didn't have a frame of context. America and the world was still very much abundant, happy. It was a time of relative peace. And so they didn't have a framework. They didn't find that those documents were necessary. Um, and I forgot the original question. I'm sorry, Mark.
Listen, don't worry.
Where was I going with
But
that?
I think
Uh,
this whole discussion of normalcy bias, I think the other thing is that you, praise God, are made in His image. You have all the gifts and talents that He's given you, and you are human. You are human. I am human, no matter what they're trying to put into process at the moment, which means at times, of course, we have feelings, we have our own struggles. So when people are watching us on screen and they're so used to watching people on television, they think, actors or whatever, and this whole thing of celebrity culture, and let's go there. This is uncomfortable for some. The author, we are not celebrities. We are trying to bring truth as we believe it is, and we ask people to test that. How do we
yes.
encourage people to realize that we are humans? We go through some very, very difficult times, and that we are not these celebrities that some people might want to hold up.
So, the earlier generations before 1900, they didn't really have this problem. But, slowly, incrementally, we have been boiled like frogs into being siloed, which means we're just, and I think their crowning achievement was the lockups that really broke the connection that we have as humans. Um, and I'm going to tie this into, because I remember it, I celebrate now. If I have a brain hiccup on air, it used to be like really frustrating and stuff. And now, whether it's a typo or whether I have a moment that I just hiccup, I celebrate being a human. And I think that we really need to reach out to one another. It's critical at this point. As humans, we have always lived, some people say tribes, community. whatever. Um, the powers that be have worked really hard to isolate you so that you feel alone and powerless as they squash you like a bug.
How do we how do we get beyond that? What are the practical things that I mean, I have a few answers, but I want to hear it from you. What are the practical things that we need to start doing?
So the first thing that I do is my faith. I mean,
Hmm.
that for me is really important. I also do things that are good for me. Like I grow my own food. It's organic, and I put it. Not only do I grow it, so I'm weeding, I'm watering. I get to enjoy listening to the birds outside, looking at the different colors, having the wind kiss my cheeks. And, I have to go to some pretty dark places to bring the news out. And then I put it up, I preserve it, whether that's freezing or dehydrating or canning. And then I cook from scratch. So that's health. I also do have a nutrition and exercise routine. And for me, that helps to keep my body and my mind sharp. If you haven't heard it, if you don't use it, you will lose it. So, people that are not using their brains or not using your bodies, you're slowly losing them, especially today. So, these are some very practical things that you can do. I would reach out as a human. I just sometimes when I need to remember what it was like in the good old days of the Waltons, I turn on the wall, I'll get on YouTube, watch a Walton series or Gilligan's Island, and you just watch the interaction between people, and we just don't have that. Like I moved to this town of 49 people in the heart of farming country, the heart of America. And what I discovered is I really don't have friends. You have to be a generational farmer to be accepted here. There's like Nazi rule. You can't even have a few chickens in this place, or anything that you want to survive. You are forced into dependence upon the very system that have my whole life I've been independent of. I mean, I can't even walk my dog. The very first day I moved here, the mayor was chasing me down the street, and he said, "I'm going to disappear your dog if you ever walk this dog on the street again." And that's not even human. I mean, you're taking away people's ability to have a little cottage garden, have a few chickens, and then maybe a goat to have some milk, and then even their companion animal you're threatening. I mean, this is off the charts, um, inhuman, and that is part of the agenda. Remember, back in the '60s, there'd be these futuristic shows, and let's say the food that you're going to eat, you're just going to have a pill. You're not going to need to eat any food. You just eat a little or have a pill, and it'll give you all your nutrition. We're going to be interacting with robots. Well, here we are. Um, I mean, people near and dear to me that have that are close in my inner circle have said, "Well, why don't you use like one of those chat things, or I don't know what you even call them." So I'm not very technically inclined to help you expedite and perfect your writing skills. And you could generate more material that way. And it's LAI. And I go, no, I'm not going to be using the very system that I'm fighting. I'm not going to be feeding AI. So here we are. We are slipping in. We are seeing the last vestiges of humanity right now, and we're slipping into this time where the robots, quite autonomous robots, are going to be taking over. Most that those spikes on that COVID image infographic from the World Economic Forum basically told you that your job and your life are going extinct, and what will be left is silicon life forms. And what is a silicon life form? It is a robot that is a vessel, a container, and maybe the people like Bill Gates think they're going to upload their consciousness to it. Um, Whether they have a soul or not would be debatable, but in the Philo Code, it acknowledged a time when there would be dimensional beings, angels, demons, other travelers from different dimensions that could inhabit that synthetic life form. And we are, as we lose humanity, you're not going to know these. I call them humanoids. They're called synths also, um, are very realistic. They could even have artificial blood, artificial nervous system, artificial brain, artificial organs. That's why they're compartmentalizing, and they'll say, oh, we've come up with the artificial heart or this. It's not for the purpose of saving your life.
Mm,
It's
mm.
to build the components to build these synths and give. So what is the end goal? So the military calls it, well, it's a virtual twin, but I call it a satanic virtual twin. It's evil. It is a realm devoid of God, and they want it not only for humans to be converted to humanoids, but all life. They made that decision at Asilmar One to genetically modify all life on Earth, and so it would change its function from its original design to um, one that is completely synthetic or artificial.
Celeste, and I mean, this is a difficult question in many ways. I mean, it's something that I think you and I, and like many of our other friends, are wrestling with. Why did the church completely? It seems not all, but it seems like 98% or 99%. Why have they swallowed what that graphic said on the World Economic Forum and the last 3 years in regard to the pandemic of nonsense? Why did they swallow that?
I think there's two reasons. I think that the church bought in first that it should not be the salt and the light, that it should keep politics out of the pews, that church was about worshiping and Bible study and socializing with like-minded individuals. But that if you are a Bible believer, especially the New Testament, you were to go out and make disciples of all the earth, which means being the salt and the light. So I think that they bought that. And there was also the buying in, the incentivization, like tax credits and becoming part of the government arm of propaganda, where the government was the sugar daddy, if you will, that would tell you what you could say. Let's just talk frankly, abortion, for instance.
Mm.
Could you speak about abortion or not in the from the pulpit? Um, a marriage between a man and a woman today is even under fire. Even you saying you're a man and or a woman, there's actually Bible translations now that have taken sin, any reference to man, woman, or God out of the Bible. And so I think that has has had a tremendous impact. That incentivization by the government. In America, we have something called the clergy response teams, the faith based initiative, and they're very powerful. And we learned this, and this is global, so it's not just something the US. So at that last, it was in the winter, December, I think it was in December, the UN climate something or other, end of November, December. And religion, the UN is going for religion now. They want to be the God. Um, they want to be God. And so they're making their moves for that now.
I mean, we're I've just we're reminded that, in fact, we were discussing this, weren't we? That LifeSite News got strikes, I think, from YouTube for the man a woman issue. So we'll let's just say it. I'm just saying it. Um, so this whole thing of censorship, free street speech, and pushing us into a particular direction. Do you think also that within churches, and we look at, you were sharing the fact that you were there at the time of the Berlin Wall in 1989. I actually worked in Poland in 1986 before that wall came down. When we look at history, we see the persecution of Christians, and that may be something that within the West, within America, within the UK, yes, there was, of course, that's why America was founded. The Puritans left Europe, sailed on the Mayflower, and the rest is history. But do you think that in many ways we have become comfortable? How do we get, I say it respectfully, people off the couch in America and turning the NFL off, people off sofas here who are saying they're Christians, turning the television off and watching certain series to actually pay attention to what's going on around them? Does that come back to the normalcy bias?
Yes, and we it was due to our abundance, affluence, and really it was we had had relative peace since World War II. I mean, there were localized things like the Iraq War, but it wasn't the whole world at war. And so people could retreat to their homes. They were busy with their jobs, taking care of their family, doing some social activities, going to church. And like I said, it was the normalcy bias, but it was abundance. And if you look at the prophets in the Bible, they spoke about a time that Israel struggled with. Whenever Israel had this type of abundance, they would get fat and lazy and spiritually lazy. They would not engage and they just went along with the flow. And they were judged for it, and we will be judged for it. And we are starting to see that judgment now because we did not take action. We were not alert when we should have been alert. We were, didn't spend time going into documents. What are our respective governments doing behind the scenes? And really, these days, you have to say, because governments are no longer the controllers. It's the rich men of the earth who are the controllers, and there's only a handful of them. And no, I don't know their names.
Hmm.
Everybody always asks, what are their names? These are the people, I mean, like people like Soros and Rockefeller. These are just front men. These are people above them, and you never do see their names, but their money influences every area of our life.
Hosea 4, verse 6, one of my favorite verses, um, says, my people are destroyed through lack of knowledge. Um, and you've just touched on that. We haven't paid attention enough to that. And it's something that's very close to my heart. You know this, which is history. I mean, you love history,
Yeah.
and I feel that we've been looking back. I've been looking at Stalin, looking at Hitler, looking at what was happening within Europe, and concluding, as other dear friends of ours have, including people like Carl Tigroup, etc., that we see the manipulation of the First World War. We see the manipulation of the League of Nations. We see the manipulation of the Second World War, then into the UN, etc. And you've touched on America in the 50s and then going on into the 60s, and then the whole thing of the sexual revolution, etc. And as you've said, entertainment wise, we look at, I'm not asking people to go and see it. I think the film Barbarella, starring Jane Foster, and then we've got Jane Fonda rather, and then we've got Space Odyssey 2001, and all these things, all this stuff coming at us. Do you? I don't know. We don't know how much time we've got, right? We don't know how much time we got. And I come back to this. We are not. We appear on these screens. We are not celebrities. We are very, very human people with
Mhm,
all our human frailties.
mhm.
And what is very hurtful at times is that we feel that we're trying to put information over, and some people are more concerned about what shirt we're wearing or what how is our haircut. Now that may seem a bit of a pathetic thing, but this isn't entertainment for the sake of it. This is trying to put news over. Sorry, I'm going on. I just what are your feelings about that? We have touched on this off screen, but what are your thoughts on all of that?
So I just got back from a 6 month speaking tour of the Eastern United States, and there was very much that celebrity. Uh, oh, I can't believe Celeste is in my home. And, it's very hard in the virtual realm when you're just looking at a camera or looking at your laptop or on your phone.
Mm,
Is that person really who they are? And in my case, I really am who I am. I'm very transparent. That isn't always the case, and with especially with deepfakes, you really have to be careful. Whether it's I don't care if it's alt media or whoever you follow,
mm,
and
mm,
whether it's spiritually related or not, you need to be careful of who you follow and is the person really who they are. I would do your homework because you are letting them into your space. You are letting them into your brain and possibly your body if you're following health advice. And so it is critical. But there was this, and when I went viral, of course, there were people from all over the world that wanted to put me on this pedestal and idolize me. And I can only speak for myself, but I kept praying, Lord, please keep me humble. I didn't ever want this. I just wanted to get the news out. Please keep me humble. And I praise God, He did. And actually, at work, when I worked in the government, activations are kind of a different animal. It was a place where there were not very many women. Um, just just let's just say not very many women, mostly men. High testosterone. A place where um, really was very masculine, aggressive. You have to be when you're dealing with disasters in people's lives. You have to be on top of your game. And so I say that because I struggled in those during activations with being my feminine side and being compassionate and nurturing. And in those days, you actually could pray with somebody who was going through a disaster, losing something, or getting rescued off a roof, or whatever the situation was. These days, I don't think that that would be possible. But
I mean, if again, if you've turned up to a situation where, like in Hurricane Alley, a hurricane's gone through various towns and just ripped everything apart. I mean, very often people just want a hug, just be able to put their arms around it and just say, "I know this is awful, but we are gonna get through it." You and it is out there, so I'm not discussing anything that in one sense people don't know. But again, I say it sensitively. If there's a direction you don't want me to take you in, then just
Could
say.
could
But
I could I
sorry.
interject that so it depends on who in a disaster, and quite
Mm,
frankly, there's going to be things coming up on the face of the earth, from the heavens, from the earth. It's going to rock your world. So you're going to have to decide where are you going to turn? Who are you going to reach out to? You made a very good point in a disaster. When your world falls apart, who are you going to turn to? And that's where the human factor, if you have a network, but it's getting harder and harder. I'm a widow now and I don't have a network really. I mean, my network is the world, and
mm,
people are, which is wonderful and I love it. But if I need help, uh, shoveling snow, that's not going to help me, because you're not right here.
mm, mm,
But also you need to know that the organizations that have been set up to help you. Um, like the Red Cross. I looked into the Red Cross many years ago, decades ago, and you're not allowed to pray or express any religion at all. You had to be religion neutral,
Hmm.
and just do your job. So people need to know about that. And oftentimes, your donations, if you are giving to people in a disaster, that was our second most problematic area at FEMA were donations. Oftentimes they do not get to the actual people. So you need to know that ahead of time that if you're going to give money, it's probably going to management, maybe subsea CEO or NGOs, a yacht, and not the people that you're seeing, the poor, suffering people. So you need to know this, do your homework now. But I would say if you have to choose, get a human um, network, but it's going to be really hard at this point as people have been siloed off since 2020. You might reach out to them and you may get the door slammed in your face. So don't be surprised at that, whether it's your family or your friends or whatever.
When you were talking about disasters and talking about the Red Cross, Haiti comes to mind. We've discussed that. Can you use that as an example? I mean, we know some of the inner workings of what had gone on, but could you speak into that?
Well, so I wasn't as much involved with Haiti, but the donations did not get to the people. Um, Big contractors were given uh, financial incentive to do agenda driven things like put in infrastructure that the average or the poor person would never need. And but the poor people never saw it. They didn't see food, they didn't see water, they did not see medical help. There were things that were put, infrastructure things put in for the convenience of the rich class, but not for the poor people.
One of the issues that we've faced over here is the fact that certain charities that I won't name, um, we look at their balance sheet and we look at the CEO and we suddenly realise they're being paid £135,000 a year, and we just think, excuse me, why? Where? And then you look at the management and you think, where is this money going? This comes back to non-government organisations. This whole thing of lobbying. Over here, say, as a friend of mine explained recently, you'll get a new member of parliament going into parliament who may not have much experience in regard to a working life. They've gone to university, they've done what's called the PPE degree of philosophy and trying to think of the other, and economics, and then suddenly they come out, they work for some member of parliament, and then they become a member of parliament themselves. But you've got these lobbyists pushing all this opinion. So, in regard to your political system, a load of people have gone off to Washington, D.C. And I say it respectfully, where it's only recently people have discovered that really, well, some of us have known for a long time, but it seems like it's two wings of the same bird. How can politicians go there on a salary of, $100,000 for argument's sake, and then become multi-millionaires? Why? That's part of my frustration. Where Americans, why have you not waken up to this? But I know that many have, but it's the same over here. And the problem is, it's the kind of psychology that they want to create where people are not engaging in that anymore. They feel as though they can't change things or do anything about it. I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Well, it is very difficult because the governments are not, we think of them, we've elected these people to
Mm,
represent us,
mm.
but we fail to understand that the governments are no longer governments. They are ruled by this handful of very super wealthy individuals. I mean, we cannot even comprehend their wealth. I watched a YouTube the other night, plutocracy, and these are people. I mean, our like I said, we have it's beyond my mind how wealthy they are, and they're actually running the show, and that's why we don't have a say. And then since World War II, and really since 9/11, where the focus was like let's put 9/11, um, the government would, even down to the local level, um, whether it's a borough or a city or a town or whatever. Um, City council, once in the early 2000s, I went to do a bill that you could not electronically identify somebody else, not your child, not your elderly parent, but you could do it for yourself. And I just wanted my city councilor on board with it. And actually, he was running around the world in some exotic country, and I'm going, what is my what is he doing around the world? He can't even take care of his own locality. And then so I was a lobbyist, but it was a small ag lobbyist. Did I take money? No. Did I offer money? No, because I didn't have any. I was doing it on my own dime. I did it because agriculture was being threatened in the early 2000s, and I wanted to make a difference. And so I did spend the time, and I had a very good relationship with the legislature and with FEMA. They actually wanted me to go into politics, and I said, no, thank you. But I'll never forget one day I went in, and they actually put in those, what are they called? Those that the banks use, uh, like if there's trouble, like a bank robber, and they push like under the desk, there's a bell that
Ah, right.
rings that,
Yep.
that rings security. So our politicians, the people that we put elected into office, have these emergency bells, and they just, if they don't want to hear you, if you are not on the schedule or any, you can't just walk in and have a conversation with them. Even as a lobbyist, as an official lobbyist, I could get 10 minutes with everybody. They had to do that, but they could only give me 10 minutes, or they could give me more, but the minimum was 10 minutes. But if you're the average person, you could go in, you could travel all day to see your representative or
Mm.
senator or whatever your government official is, and not be heard. And then they can haul you out with security. And so then you think, okay, I'm going to make a difference by contacting my politician by email, or I'm going to write them a personal letter, a handwritten note. It's going to show that I really care. Do you know that those are just round filed? They have, for decades, they have just gone in the garbage can, and you have to use a specific, it's called a memorandum of support or opposition in our
Mm.
country.
Mm.
I
Mm.
don't, it's a legal form,
Mm.
a format. And in that way, when you submit it to your official, it must become part of the record, and that your voice is then heard. But people don't know that. And things, you and I have had this discussion too. People are not taught in school things like, how do we communicate with our public officials to make our voice heard. We're not taught even simple things like we've discussed as home economics,
Mm.
how to balance your checkbook, how to um, preserve food and keep us safe from food poisoning or whatever. All the things that, like in my day, I made all my own clothes. And of course, I if I said hope economics to a millennial right now, and you guys leave your, if you're a millennial and you hear this, and you know how to make your clothes and have your voice heard, and know how to balance your checkbook by hand, not on the internet, leave your comments for us below. We'd be really interested to hear if you have a home economics. Do you even know what that word means, or those words mean?
You're discussing. I mean, uh, Celeste, what is the say the catchphrase that you use at the beginning of your broadcast? What's the catchphrase that you use?
So I basically am the 1880s pioneer woman fighting the 21st century
Mm,
battle
mm.
or
I
war.
should have reminded you of that at the beginning of the interview, but I apologize. But break that. You've just begun to break that down, haven't you?
Yeah.
Because you're talking about the old the skills that were needed if it's going back to the frontier and all the rest, and there's this history of what America stands for, and then of course someone who was a huge fan of still is a huge fan of John Wayne movies and all of that thing, and directed by Ford the director, but that is what you're on about. So the other thing is, within your education system, civics of what the Constitution stands for has not been talked about, has not been taught either. Can you speak into that?
Well, history has vanished. Uh, Everything of substance, reading, writing, arithmetic, history, home economics has all disappeared to make way for the things that we can't say, the agenda items that
Mm,
they want us to focus on, that if we said them right now, we would probably be censored.
mm,
So we can't even talk about it. See, even in a conversation between two friends, we
mm,
cannot even talk about it on air because if we do, they will put the gavel down. We're guilty, we're sentenced, and we're executed. So, you know, it's hard to even have the discussion anymore because they will not allow you. And it's only going to get much worse.
mm. I mean, I know. I mean, home economics. But we'll break that down. We'll describe what that means. But it's something that I know is so dear to your heart. You know, producing food, making bread, etc. So define. Then we'll define home economics. Let's define those skills that are so needed when we look at the modern age fast food, which sadly is what America is defined as.
So, in the past, if you study most history books, and I really encourage everybody to get a Dr. Chase's household receipt book. It's from the 1880, 1885 ish era. I've encouraged you to get that
I,
book, and I think
I've
you
got
did.
that copy. I've got that
And
copy.
it has everything in it that used to be taught in home ec, how to plant a garden, how to raise animals, uh, growing your own livestock feed, um, how to make your own medicine, how to make great baking powder biscuits for those that biscuits and gravy. Um, it was being self-reliant on yourself. You did not go to the store. Your home was your castle, your kingdom, and you lived off the land. You knew what to do. You might make your own fabric. I make my own wine. I make 30 different kinds of wine, but I can make wine out of anything. Um, and not necessarily for drinking. I can distill it down and use it as an antiseptic if I can't get rubbing alcohol or iodine to um, cleanse a wound of some kind. So these are the type of skills. And another thing, we need to get back to books, hard copy books,
Brilliant.
on many different topics,
Mm, mm,
everything from gardening to medicine to old fashioned cookbooks. But then then you have to take it. I'll just get a book out. You have to take it from here, and
mm.
then you have to say, okay, what equipment and tools do I need to make this a reality in my life? Because there are tools of the trade, so to speak. So if you're going to make cheese, you need certain tools. If you're going to make beauty products or medicine, you need certain tools. Now, in my case, I have a set for my consuming my what I'm going to consume in food are different than my beauty, let's say my medicines or soaps or something like that, because you don't want to get some lye and eating your bar of soap. Although I do have an interesting story about that if you want me to tell it.
I would love to hear that. I would
Okay,
love to hear that.
so I went to a fiber fair with a friend of mine. We actually got in much trouble. We came back with a colored cashmere goat. But I had to stop because in the state that I lived in, you couldn't get Everclear, and Everclear is like super, like vodka on steroids. It's very high alcohol proof, and I needed it to make transparent soap. So to make a milky colored soap, you need to put in this alcohol, and through a 12-hour process, it makes the most beautiful jewel tones like ruby and emerald and royal purple. They're just beautiful, exquisite soaps. And so I bought like 5 cases of Everclear. And as I'm thinking to myself, here I am, like a Christian Bible believing person with like these 5 cases of Everclear, and there were people standing in line. And so I felt like I owed the person an explanation. I said, I'm going to make soap with this. And so the guy in goes, he goes, I bet people are standing in line to get their mouth washed out with soap because he thought that the alcohol was still in there, but after
Yeah.
cooking it for 12 hours, I can assure you it just made beautiful soap. It had no alcohol content at all. But so there's different skills that and different tools you need. And this is your time. This even now, get vintage stuff if you can, to vintage tools, because they're going to be much higher quality than anything that you can buy now. I've seen a deterioration since we started getting everything from China. Um, the quality, it won't last. It won't hold up in a time season, hard season. And I can tell you with what's down, coming upon the face of the earth from the heavens, from nature in this cyclical cycle that we're in, there isn't going to be electricity. So can you live? And it's going to be rather cold, which is what I've been discussing about an ice age. So do you have like feather down quilts? Do you have a hat, warm hat, gloves, coats, things that you can layer? Um, do you have basic medicine that if you can't go to the doctor or the hospital, that you can make your own medicine or have those skills? And you and I were talking one time, and I talked about my great uncle's journal, and he was like an 8 or 10-year-old boy, and he was chopping the firewood. This is back in probably 1875, 1880, and he chopped his finger off. So my great grandmother ran up to the attic and got spider webs and put the spider webs in it. And of course it didn't help the finger. Now fingers can be reattached if you put them in milk, but back then it wasn't the case. And so but it stopped the bleeding. What happened? What can you use from your kitchen if you chop you're slicing your lettuce and your
Mhm.
tomatoes for that
Mhm.
good salad, that delicious salad, and it's bleeding and it doesn't stop? Well, you can go and get your cayenne pepper, and I can tell you that cayenne pepper will stop that bleeding. And it doesn't. People go, oh, does it sting? It doesn't sting. But you have to know these things, you have to study them, and it comes from books. I would have books on this type of wisdom and knowledge, and there's people that specialize in that. So I would say books first, then tools, and then keep your body in shape, because you're not going to go straight from the couch to an 1880 lifestyle. Like even for me, I live in North Dakota now, and we have these brutal winters. I have 10-foot snowdrifts in my backyard right now. Basically, I can't get out and exercise, so I did just find a electronic or I guess it's electronic, I don't know, you plug it in, device that is a micro impact. It's called Juvent, where it shakes you and it gives you, it's a low impact, which is great for people that maybe have some medical problems. Their joints aren't working so good. They're getting older. They can't do those rough workouts. You don't have to go lift weights. You don't have to get one of those ski things where you're going like this, or a bicycle you're going like this. So you want to keep your body in shape, because to survive what's coming, you're going to need to be in shape, even if you're older, even if you have aches and pains, even if you don't sleep. You have to keep up the production because there's a routine, but there's blessing in it. There's blessings of this lifestyle. You have well-being. You get to enjoy wonderful flavors when you cook your own food and grow it, because it's nutrient dense. And there's a sense of satisfaction that comes from us. We did this plant. I mean, with God's help, we grew it, we tended it, and then now we're enjoying the fruit of our labor. That's what Thanksgiving, the holiday Thanksgiving, is all about. So there's just rewards in doing this, and there's rewards of knowing that in a grid down situation that you will survive, that you have the tools and the skills to do it. You know, I have to refer back to that Dr. Chase's book. Even I do have to do that every once in a while, but it's that's a blessing too, that we have the books. It's just think, books are, you can get large print, and they're easier on the eyes. We don't have to worry about that blue light damaging our eyes. And they usually have nice indexes. So I like my books.
Well, and the other thing is, at times, especially if they're recent books, they're written by our friends, and that is also a blessing as well. I think that's always such a blessing. Now, this wasn't a setup, but I think not far from where you are now is actually a vegetable, but maybe not, maybe a fruit, but an example of what you can grow, an example of what you do.
Okay, here you
Here
go.
it is. Can you describe that?
This is this is one of my. This is a galet. This is actually a French um, squash. It's a winter squash, and I actually grew my first 45-pound squash this year.
Wow.
I actually gave it to a doctor of one of these, my big squash, to a doctor friend of mine, and she called it the submarine. And because most people don't see this kind of thing. And before I went on my speaking tour, I put up um, 200 quarts of winter squash and pumpkin. Now I can make pumpkin bread, muffins, pumpkin pies. I can do pumpkin or squash soup. And I can make any flavor. Like when I came home, I had curry, and winter squash lasts a long time. So
What what
yeah.
what are the just quickly, because I mean this is a brilliant example, right? What are the processes that you have gone through to actually create that squash? Because at some point you've got to grow a seed, you've got to prepare for that, and all the rest. Can you just quickly, or not quickly, go through that timeline for us?
So basically, I start in the
Mm.
fall, and I would get any supplies that you need. Like I grow my seeds in little 72 cell seed trays. And then you have to get your dirt, because at least in this country, you're not going to find dirt or seed trays in January, let's say. And then in February, I start planting my peppers. In March, I plant tomatoes. And by May, then you harden them off. Yeah, I usually have to up pot them, because a little seed tray is really, a cell is like that. You up pot it to like a 3 or 4 inch pot. And then the next step is to put it in the shade for about a week. Um, Filtered sunlight outside after frost, danger of frost is over. Of course, some things are frost tolerant, like your garlic. I would often, what by the time the snow melts, my garlic is like 6 inches tall. Onions are very cold tolerant. So some things you don't have to worry about. And then I plant them. Of course, you would weed. You want to make sure that you've weeded and you don't want to use any chemical herbicides or anything like that. You can put down cardboard. I would not, a lot of people go, oh, I'll use magazine covers. It's not so good because there's a lot of dyes in there that are poisonous and toxic and bioaccumulative in your body. And then you just have to, you're dependent on God you know, and to see what the weather's going to be. And if you have to, if you maybe planted things a little early, you might have to cover them up with some plastic. Christmas tree lights work well, also, greenhouses. And then you just water and weed. And as your plants grow, there's less and less weeding. Weeding is very intensive in the beginning because there's a lot of dirt and the plants are
Mm.
little. So there's weeds will grow 10 times faster than your crop
Mhm.
plant. And then at the end of the year, you harvest whatever when it's ripe or when it's the size that you want. And you have to allocate time. How are you going to preserve it? You're going to have to determine, you know, do I want to dehydrate this? Do I want to freeze it? Do I want to can it? All of that takes a little bit of time and it does take equipment. Like, do you need Ziploc bags? Do you need canning jars? Do you need a canning kettle? Do you need a pressure cooker? Do you need a dehydrator? What size do you want? Do you want something small? And beware these days, there's a lot of scammers out there. So make sure I just ordered a from eBay. I'm so mad that I did it. I ordered a vintage said popover pan, and when I got it, it was a muffin tin, and it was a mini muffin tin at that. And I paid an exorbitant price. So there are gougers out there. Don't believe the description. Don't believe the image. You better contact, if it's something that you want, you need to contact the vendor and say, ask questions about it because there's a lot of, I've been scammed 3 times in the last year, and I basically have just made the personal decision not to buy anything more from eBay or Etsy.
But what you've just done, kindly done there, you've just given us a very, very quick lesson. It's all of that knowledge, and it then goes back, as it was said, to home economics, etc., which is frankly all part of your journey, Celeste, all part of what you are doing now and imparting that. And I know that people are really interested in that. When you start talking about those subjects, you are connecting with people deliberately, but you're trying to impart that knowledge because of what you know of what is coming down the line. And you're not saying that for nothing. This is not entertainment for entertainment's sake. You are trying to save people's lives. And that's what you have just laid out.
Well, and there's such joy. So this is not like you're in school and you're like memorizing all those dates, all the
Mm, mm,
explorers, and if you don't do it right, the teacher's going to come up and whack you on the hand with your
mm.
ruler. It's actually a joy. You're out there and the wind and the birds and the colors, and you know you're going to have good food, and it's just a joy. And then eating good food that has flavor. You know, you've been to the store, you know that you can get a tomato that leather because it has no taste, no color, nothing. It is a tomato, but there's nothing there. And I so here I have to do my spiel. So I grow 50 different kinds of all different colors. I grow 100 different kinds of peppers, all colors, and from sweet. I make all my own spices, my chili powder. I grow 15 different kinds of paprika alone, sweet, medium, hot, and exotic. Um, and then I grow, my niche is plants from around the world and different time periods. So I love to take a year and explore different cultures, the basics. Like, what does this culture do with a cabbage? What do they do with an onion? What do they do with their beef? and I explore it, and it makes it an adventure every year because I take this new culture and I learn a lot about the people. And what am I doing also as the backstory on it, and you're doing the backstory as you do this podcast. I'm saving seeds that maybe even the indigenous people, because they're having to go to work in factories and not working on the farm any longer, are giving up the seed population. So I'm saving diversity of seeds. I'm actually, when I grow them, I save my own seed. So yes, I use a bunch of seed, but then I also save back a bunch of seed for my next growing season. So I'm saving in these indigenous seeds and plants from extinction. And I'm nurturing them with lots of love. And then I'm also preserving these recipes that may be forgotten to time. Like I make mole, and mole is a chili with well, it's actually got 12 different ingredients and 12 different peppers. And you think, oh, that might be too hot. No, it's not hot. It does this trippy thing in your mouth. It's sweet. And then because the flavors come out in, it's like a rolling thing. It's like immersive. It's kind of like the metaverse of culinary. So, like, one minute you'll get the salt, and the next you'll get the sweet, and then you get the kind of the nutty, and it's fabulous. And so you get that experience. So all that to say, it really is a joy and a pleasure.
Mm.
And yes, it's work. I know that when I would bring my things of late to the farmers market, people would shake their heads and go, too much work. They didn't even want to buy the product because it was too much work. Um, but they don't understand that your option is going to be synthetic food if not a lot of health problems, if you can even get it, because the time is going to come that your electricity very soon is going out, and so you need to prepare for that time.
It's when we've touched on the whole fast food within America, within the UK, and then recently where you've taken a, let's say, a McDonald's hamburger, stuffed it on the shelf in the mid to late 80s, and then you take it down from that shelf and nothing's moved, nothing changed. And this is the kind of, there it is, as you've said, synthetically. But when we eat that stuff, the damage it's then doing to our bodies, hence why you are passionate about what you've just been explaining. Celeste, I want to take it in a different direction. That in maybe it is a bit painful, but I think if anything you don't want me to go down, then just say. Um, but you have had tragedy in your life. It has not been easy. As we come back to this, everyone thinks we're on screen, this being this front passing information, but you have walked the walk. You walk the walk. It is defined by some tragedy. There have been some three events, and one that it was a number of years ago that is actually out there in newspapers, and it involved an incident in your house, etc., etc. And I wondered if you could kindly talk about that.
So basically, I went away for the weekend. I lived in a split level house. That's basically a two-story house.
Mm,
And I came back and I opened the door like we all do and unlocked it. And I had a plant, so there was a window next, a slender window
mm.
next to the door, and I had a plant growing in there, and it was tipped over. And I thought, I mean, in your mind in such a thing tries to grasp onto some rational explanation. So that's important to remember for as things fall apart here. Your mind is going to grasp to make sense of it, and it may not make sense of it, as you'll hear. So I climbed up the stairs and I heard this sound, and it was like I was drawn to the sound, And what I saw was so horrific that I, I fixated on the sound. Um, and it really, I didn't see the carnage all around me. I just saw, I mean, until I got to my bedroom and found that my water bed had been slashed, and whoever had done this, perpetrated this crime, had stopped at the sink to flood the house. And it, after I turned off the water, enough could seep in. I was in shock. And I saw that every single thing in my home had been destroyed. It was a debris field of about 3 feet. Like everything was, every piece of clothing was slashed, furniture, pictures, every dish broken into pieces, food dumped out. Every plant had every leaf taken off and its roots inside and out. And and then I go through that debris field and I'm super in shock. And I saw in the entryway, "We don't want you or your retard, move," spray painted in black letters in my entryway. And I just went out and I was just, a neighbor said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "No." And I don't know if I said call the police or she just called the police. I don't know. I don't remember because I really truly was in shock. And the detective said that other than a murder, it was the worst crime that they had seen. Um, it was in all the media, and I was chased by all three networks, and it was hard to give my kids some um, normalcy without, the media. It was hard enough that I was dealing with the media, and our whole home was destroyed. Um, but it continued. We were actually being hunted, and like I took my kids to their they were in elementary school, their class play, um, and then we came home at like 9 o'clock at night, and our cat had been murdered and stapled to the door, and my car was destroyed. But I gotta say, this was the time. This was 1983, just north of Seattle. And people reached out from around the world to encourage me. Some people helped me rebuild. Little old ladies said, "I don't have anything to share with you, but I will pray for you." And I kept those cards until I left the agencies and had to leave my old life behind and begin a new life.
So the lesson, I mean, awful, but the lessons there is, as you've said, how people then reached out to you, how people were supportive in that situation. Because, I mean, this may sound a really stupid question, but that must have absolutely stretched your mental health to the limit. How did you get through that?
I think it is the place, the internal fortitude that every human has for survival, and whether it's a genocide or what I experienced. And there's many other brutalities that a person could go through. Of course, I did was relied on my faith as well. It was a stronghold in time of trouble. It was a strong tower in time of trouble, and I was not disappointed in God, because He literally got me through that period of time. Uh, then I had the big challenge because I am a person of faith. I had to it that they determined that it took about 4 people on an amphetamine several hours, 4 hours, to do what they did, and I had done a civil suit, and I got the paperwork, and I found out who the perpetrators were 3 months after the statute of limitation ran out. And so then that challenged my faith in a way that, one, I had to trust God because they got away with it. And the only, if I mold it over, if I let it get into me, that I was angry or bitter, it was only going to hurt me. It wasn't going to hurt them. And then I proceeded and I had to forgive them. And so that's what I did. I forgave them and I just turned it over to my God and said, you know, at the end of their life, they're going to have to account for the things that they did in their life, but I'm free. And then that kept me a healthy person.
Forgiveness,
Mhm.
not at times easy.
Yeah.
It's some people approach it in a very, very trite way. And with all the people watching, I hope that that particular story is profoundly helpful. How, Celeste, how do you deal with betrayal?
So I had heard about betrayal, but I didn't experience betrayal until I think it was the fall of 2019. Fortunately, I am a person of faith, and so I was on a prayer walk, and the Holy Spirit told me, he said, "You're going to be betrayed." And so I went home and I wrote the person, and to my shock, the person wrote back and said, "Yes, I was going to just betray you. I was just going to do it in my own time, in my own way." And then the Holy Spirit, I mean, your natural instinct is to defend yourself. That person proceeded to spread the 10 sins of Celeste around everywhere, uh, vast, uh, around the world. I lost a lot of support. Um, I was, I mean, people literally thought I was a evil, wicked person, which isn't true. And but nevertheless, the Holy Spirit said, "Be silent," and He was going to use that. That was my first experience, and He finally gave me permission at 5 months. So I was concerned. I One of the 10 sins of Celeste is that I never worked for FEMA. I wasn't a Christian. I wasn't married to David, all these allegations, which if you're in the public eye, you're going to get allegations. If you're fearful of allegations, this is not the media is not the place for you because it's going to happen. It just is the nature of it. And so but I was concerned about protecting my identity and it not being manipulated. So what I did is I chose two people, both men, and I showed my documentation to them on every allegation. And then I went to my community, um, which I have an online community of supporters, and we talked about it. I was granted permission to talk about it at that time. And so we openly talked about it. And that put because what was happening is evil speech and slander travels like wildfire and it burns inside a person. So it was taking a toll because I wasn't speaking out. And as a godly woman and as a female leader, um, I needed to just listen to the Lord, and it was time to put those things to rest, to answer those questions. And so I did. And then the person continued to betray, and I continued to be silent no matter what. If my Savior Jesus Christ could endure what he did, I can endure it. And I did. But I found it interesting that subsequently I have been betrayed and he's used the same model. I am to be silent about it. And that's okay. I mean, I'm getting more comfortable, but I got to say it's your flesh wants to defend, you just leap out. It almost leaps out at you. You just want to, but that's your Mike the headless chicken. So People want it. So government wants it. Media wants it. They want you to use that, just the primal brainstem, and not your rational thinking and your person of faith brain. They just want you to react, a reactionary thing. So all of you out there, if you haven't looked at the YouTube Mike the Headless Chicken, you need to check it out because you don't want to act like that. So,
And please check it out because it is really brilliant. I'm reminded of that verse where, Jesus is, I think, before Pontius Pilate and is going, a lamb before its shearers is silent, and I will give you the words to say in the appointed hour. Not easy, as I know myself. Betrayal is harsh at times beyond words. You touched on David. Could we go there? Could you describe sadly what happened there, but talk about life before, because it it's the fact that people need to understand the your humanity, and then I've got I'm watching the chat at the moment, and very kindly, someone's just put, Cynthia's just put, Celeste, your faith is such an inspiration. God bless you. And that that kind of feedback within of our humanity, I think, is really important. That's why I've just read that. Another, Julie's just saying, thank you, Celeste. So that is really kind. But could you talk about David? Talk about that life, and then sadly what happened?
so what happened is I had to go dark. The agencies asked me to do something I could not do. I went to my inner circle. They said, no, you absolutely can't do it. And so I went dark. And a alt media personality person uh, offered to help. And part of that help was hiring David to find me a safe place. And it ended up after 10. I mean, it was like planes, trains, and automobile, you know. I had 10 different places, and like we were chased by black helicopters. We had avalanches. Uh, I was trying to fix David up with my single sister. Um, it was wild and crazy. So we basically had a courtship but I didn't know it at the time, in his pickup. And so then uh, we stopped at this one hotel, and I don't remember what I had, but no, maybe I had fish and chips. I don't remember. Maybe David had something else. Anyway, he asked me to marry him, and I said, okay. And so we got married. We had this beautiful marriage, and lots of adventures, lots of adventures. We were on the same page spiritually, um, prep wise, faith wise, everything. There were differences. Like David liked to rearrange my kitchen every night because he was a night owl, and have to rearrange it back every morning. And so that little dance went on. It was not a big deal for either one of us. So, you know, um, so one day, the evening before, we watched a Viking movie. David's heritage was from, he was from his family was from Norway. And we went to bed early after having some French onion soup. And he got up early. He did his devotions. He checked the alt media news and got his breakfast. He liked me to stay out of the way, clear the deck. David's getting ready for work, and he left at about 6 in the morning. And our last words to each other were, I love you. And he said, I'll see you tonight. And 15 minutes later, he was dead. Um, it had a lot of suspicion surrounding his death. Um, by that time, I was already a whistleblower. I had my own radio program, and I was getting more well known. And so, anyway, so what are some of the things? Uh, his cell phone disappeared from the coroner's car, never to be seen of again. And this was a single car accident on a windy stretch where there was not line of sight, so anybody on the road would, because you're going around a series of lakes, you wouldn't have any line of sight to see the accident. There is no cell coverage in that area. Um, he was taken to the crime lab, a crime lab for a single car accident. Are you kidding me? They spent over $1 million on an autopsy. Originally, I was told there would be no autopsy because it was a single car accident. But when he died, he was killed the Thursday, a week before Thanksgiving. Um, when I finally, after Thanksgiving, the Monday after Thanksgiving, I called the mortician, and he said that they actually did the most extensive autopsy they had ever seen. Um, I had asked their highway patrol did $1 million of why did this accident happen, because they couldn't explain it. And even after $1 million of pouring it in, they could not determine. They said he was going below the speed limit. There was no ice. He had not braked like for a deer or something like that. The only thing they didn't check were the brakes. And then I asked where the total car was. I asked them to please check the brakes, and neither the highway patrol nor that company did. And I was dealing with deep grief without a support network. So I had enough on my hands just because I literally got down on the ground and wanted to die. I wanted to crawl in the grave with David. But the Holy Spirit was so present. So when the sheriff came to tell me that David had been killed, because it was 2 hours later before they even came to tell me, his words dropped to the ground. And I turned around in a circle, and that was the Holy Spirit enveloping me and comforting me. And within 48 hours, he goes, this is the Holy Spirit. He's saying, Celeste, the waves are going to come. And they did come. And he goes, I want you to think of yourself as a fishing bobber. And all I could think about is David's red and white fishing bobber. And he, and you're just bobbing along, bobbing along, bobbing along on top of the waves. And sure enough, the waves did come, which are challenges that a widow faces, no matter if it's a death from disease or something like this, where there's all this mystery and signature of the agencies and all of that surrounding it. But the Lord was there. And I had also, because I had the lifestyle I did, I had goats, I had chickens, I had a golden retriever. I had to take care of them. I could not fall apart. I did not have the luxury of falling apart. And so in the end, it turned out that it, I had to milk the goats twice a day and feed chickens. And then I thought, oh my God, I'm never going to cook again. Because, single women, you hear about the single women that don't just buy out all the time. And then I go, oh no, the food supply is all contaminated out there. I have no choice but to grow my food and continue canning it. And I remember the first time I made bread after David was killed, and my tears were falling into the bread as I was kneading it. But there was something cathartic about that. It Each time it got easier, and eventually through faith, I did do something on Facebook, which you can still find. It's called Widow's Might. I journaled. um, I had good days, I had bad days, and I was raw. I was transparent. I just said it like it was, but I always relied on the Lord. You have to bow to God's sovereignty in this with a death. You can't bargain, you can't throw a temper tantrum. There's nothing except to just bow to the sovereignty of God, and He knows the time of every individual. So it's really where the rubber meets the road with your faith. And so basically, I had 3 years of grief, deep grief. And then on a July 1st, I'll never forget it, uh, because I woke up and the Holy Spirit says, okay, He goes, you're going to start a community, an online Christian community, and you're going to go in front of the camera. And I'm going, whoa, whoa, I am a photojournalist. I do in back of the camera. I don't in front of the camera. I am not one of those beboppy, pretty cutesy little anchor women. But one thing for sure is I'm obedient. And so I might have had that that reaction of horror. And I tell you, the first 3 months were misery. I had sweat. My voice, I felt like somebody was strangling me because I was so tight. My knees were shaking, my palms were sweating. I was just like, oh my gosh. And then I'll never forget 3 months after I started, um, I had a Skype call, and I do believe it was Doug Hagman. I recognized the little Skype thing, so I just grabbed my jacket and I go, you know what? I have no fear anymore. I actually enjoy this. So that's basically. I have lots of for the widows out there and people who will lose somebody they love. Um, it does get better. It never goes away, but use God as your stronghold, and the Holy Spirit, He doesn't let you down. And but there'll always be a, a, a place in my heart for David, and I can hardly wait to see him again. But it will be different, and I understand that. Um, but you go on, and I've got to say that God has been exceedingly gracious, and I have found favor in His eyes because He has been so good to me. I never had the opportunity to be discover who I am as a woman, apart from being a wife, a mother, a child, a grandmother, all of these things. Um, and I have had that experience, and to be humble, to be used. Um, and I got to say this. So, why did this maybe happen on a spiritual level? And of course, I don't know for sure because I don't have the mind of God. But I can say this, that I was a strong woman. I have known about the powers that be agenda since I was 5. My dad was in naval warfare. I lived my life in prep. I was a strong woman. I had never been broken. And I needed to be broken entirely to know the healing power of Jesus Christ, not from an academic, intellectual level, but from the heart level. Because what the Lord did is He took this simple, broken woman and He put her on the global stage. And to minister to all of you out there, I had to know and experience the brokenness that you feel. And when you send me an email and you're reaching out to be tender and compassionate and to impart with the wisdom that I can possibly impact, that may help you get you through whatever situation you're going through. He needed to do that, and I'm grateful for that, and I'm thankful for that.
Celeste, thank you for for sharing that. Um, I think one of the things that I wanted to achieve today in our conversation was It's reflecting our humanity. It's reflecting your humanity. People then begin to understand what you've been through, and and the cost of that. This is as I've used that phrase. This is not a hobby. This is our life. That you have just described your life. There was another incident that you have talked about involving a helicopter, and I wonder if you touched on that in regard to what where David was taking you, finding somewhere to bug out, so to speak. But there was another incident that happened where a helicopter landed. Could you kindly talk about that, please?
So it was when the military was unveiling their transhumanist agenda, and I was working in letting people know the transhumanist agenda and going into details because there were details that were hidden behind the governmental and military veil, um, that the public didn't know about, and so I just attended those conferences
Mm,
and participated in a very proactive way. Um, oh, I think my work, a lot of that is in Steve Quayle's book Terminated, some of that. But I had been working out in the garden and I had to come in for a drink. And I lived in Montana, and it was plate glass windows everywhere because the scenery was so spectacular. And so am drinking my drink and looking out the window, and a Blackhawk lands in my driveway, and I knew that he had shoot to kill, and that if I had been in the garden, I would not be here on this interview right now. And but he looked at me like, back off. And I just shrugged my shoulders and I basically gave him the look, you do what you got to do. I'm going to do what I've got to do. And there were some more interesting stories about, like, that particular week, that same week, my car computer goes out. Here I am fighting transhumanism, and my car computer goes out. And it was the same week that that happened. So I don't know that that was there are no such things as coincidences. So let's just leave it at that.
Again, Celeste, this brings as I've said, I reiterate this deliberately without sounding as if I'm repeating myself, because this is not a Hollywood movie. This is people's lives. People, and I know with others who I won't mention, and they are friends as well, where people have either found their brakes cut, the brake fluid cut, etc., etc., or their family have been attacked and poisoned, etc. This is a reality. We don't say these stories to go, look at us. This is the last thing that people want to go through. But God has also carried you through all of that. And this is not, as I say, entertainment. We need more and more people engaging in regard to what is going on. Of course, we need prayer. I wonder what the other thing, in many ways, is we sort of start coming to an end in our time, but not rushing that. Um, where are we going now, Celeste? What steps? We've touched on certain specific steps. We've touched on the fact that people might want the Waltons and the Little House on the Prairie. Frankly, who doesn't? Are we are we able to turn any of this back? What is the direction of travel from now, in your opinion?
I think humanity at large has been severely wounded, maybe unto death. All we can really do is have faith and remain a pure human. I talk about that a lot in my
Mm,
coverage. Be a pure human. And with all the emotions, all the frailties, don't beat yourself up when you make a mistake. Just pick yourself up by the bootstraps and keep on going. keep on trucking, as they say. And I think that that's because we can't force it on anybody. I think we learned that during um, the 220 debacle, weapon debacle. Um, that it broke families apart, it broke friends apart, it broke churches apart, it tore the fabric of humanity. It doesn't matter what country you live in, where it was global. And all we can really do is turn to our creator and and keep human ourselves and be an inspiration. We can go to people with the truth and we can beat it over their head, or we can just do a drop, 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 and do it with love and compassion. And when you do that, people, my dad would say, you get more flies with honey than you do with vinegar, Celeste. And I think that was a good word for today. I mean, we can beat people over the head with the truth and where we're at and all this, but all you're going to do is alienate them. But when you love them, because I don't care if they've strayed into transhumanism, enhancement, augmentation, the virtual realm, the metaverse, if anything, it is going to be your love, your prayers, your compassion on them as people to draw them back to being a true human.
I find that very humbling to listen to, because it very often, I know in certain cases maybe I have literally whacked some people over the head with information in the past, and I do have. I mean, the last thing, and I work very hard at this. The last thing I want is "I told you so." That's the last phrase I try not to use when we've informed people about taking a particular thing in the arm, and it's sad. And I have a lot of sympathy when certain individuals, after one or two, have suddenly gone, "I'm going to stop now because I've realised that the information that is out there, that there is something in this, and this is nefarious, and I may not fully understand it, but I need to talk about it. I need to seek, are there any protocols, etc., that I can take to, in fact, turn things around? What can I do with my body, etc., etc.? How can I improve my mental health? Celeste, it's to say it's been an unbelievable pleasure. The English language very often is not good enough to describe that in regard to words, but it has been an unbelievable pleasure, and I also know that it is something that we will do again, um, because people have to get to know you and others. They have to get to know who we are, and this is hard. Other people that have very kindly been listening and making comments, which you have, and I'm very grateful to that. Um, I want this to be a an encouragement to you, as we say. Um, as the Matrix says, you can either take the red pill or the blue pill, or you can have a choice to ignore this, or to actually say, "This is our reality. This is the new normal. How do we face up to that?" So, Celeste, I want to thank you very, very much for giving me the unbelievable pleasure of your company on the Sutherland Report, and speaking from your heart. So, thank you, my friend.
Well, God bless you as you go forth in sharing behind the scenes on the news that is in all of our
Mm.
faces. So may He bless the fruit of your hands and your microphone.
Thank you very, thank you very much. I much appreciated that, and I just want to thank everyone that's actually joined us today, and the very kind comments that people have said as well. And just to remember that this is a global fight across the world, and that we all need, while we have the technology to join with each other, we need to use that technology. And maybe we're even going to use that rare thing, which is carrier pigeon, where we're actually going to write a letter and encourage each other as well. That would be a new thing that we could do. But I just want to thank you very much. We're going to close out now. And this is Mark Sutherland on the Sutherland Report, having the incredible pleasure of Celeste Salon. Please check her website out, all her contact details, and just encourage her and support her as well. So thank you very much for joining us today.